Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu, salamu rasulullah, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to our Friday live interview with Maryline David. And Maryline's originally from France, lived for quite a while in Ireland and now living in the UK. And she has a background in teaching and currently studying teaching at the moment. And also one of the nearly certified back to the Fitrah coaches and mentors. Just got a little bit to get across the line with that one, don't we, Maryline?
Yes. Yes.
So welcome. Assalamu alaikum. Good to have you here.
Good to be here. Yeah. Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, first of all. Yes, I'm happy to be here and to take this opportunity to share a bit of, of what we've learned together. And
Yes. So we were thinking it would be awesome to talk about how the inside out paradigm, which is the underlying understanding that we use in the Back to the Fitrah Academy, how this psychological paradigm is helpful or beneficial in schools, especially for teachers. And I know Maryline has been doing some teaching as part of her degree and teaching before that even. So Maryline, do you want to share how you've experienced the inside out paradigm benefiting you as a teacher in when you're working with students?
Sure. Yeah, I think before I started the certificate, actually, I was doing some private tuition and assistantship in schools. And one of my, when I was learning the inside out paradigm, I had 3 students who were, and I think it really shifted with them as I was learning the paradigm. Mm-hmm. And I think because of, the thinking, also, it was more like sharing my experience with them as well. We had this kind of, because I wasn't part of the school, I could have a more personal relationship maybe with them. I mean, some teachers do as well. This is not to say that you can't do that if you're a teacher in the school. But because I had a different role in the school, that's what I meant. And often, I was helping them to prepare their speaking exam. And it's always very nerve-wracking. And there's a lot of students who have a lot of stories in their mind for this. Mm-hmm. Like they think that their accent is terrible, that there's no way they can put 3 words together in French, that, they're gonna make themselves look stupid. And most of them, they are teenagers, so they have this kind of insecurities already, regardless of whether they're learning a language or not. But in language learning, it comes out even more.
I can testify to that because I always struggled with my oral exams in French.
Well, yes, you know what I'm talking about. I think many people went through some things like that. So having the paradigm and stopping the stories was, for some students, it changed really like in 5 minutes sometimes. For some, it was like, okay, the week after they would come back and they would actually they were able to speak like, without worrying too much about making mistakes and thinking about grammar and all the kind of things that French teachers tell them to do, because that's what you do as well. So yeah, I think from that perspective, it was really, really interesting to see the transformation, not because we often as teachers, I think we think in technical terms. We think, okay, they need to improve their grammar, they need to improve their pronunciation, when it doesn't lie here at all. It's more about the feelings and the thoughts.
The confidence that they have when they don't have all those thoughts and feelings getting in the way.
Exactly. Their confidence shines when the stories falls down, they fall apart, and then that's it. You see them shine. And maybe to them they're like, oh, that sounded terrible. I'm like, no. So after that you have to build up on that and continue. But I mean there's kind of a spark that comes from that, like you turn something on and it blossoms. Really, it's amazing.
Yeah. Well, because the other thing is that that thinking and feelings also gets in the way of our good thinking. So the language is in there, but it's struggling to come out because of all the thinking that's going on about, am I good enough? Am I going to say it right? Will I get the right words and all that sort of thing? And when all of that drops away, the opportunity for it to just flow happens. And from my experiences of language, I can really understand that. So how did it, so that's wonderful, because that was, you used what you had learned to help them. How did it help you as a teacher in terms of how you showed up or your experience of teaching?
Yes, so with my experience of teaching, so before I did the certificate, I was kind of in and out of school. So I wasn't completely in. So I had a very different feeling about school, about what it could look like to be a teacher in a school. And then when I started my certificate, I was put in a school that had very strong hierarchical structures. And it took me some time to adapt to the culture. But more than that, I think, I wasn't sure at some point, because that was new to me. I wasn't sure whether, okay, is it me? Is it them? And then I found, okay, this is not, the question is not there actually. It's not about that. It's about, we are, the school has been built in such a way for some reason. And that's what I came to understand as well from my mentors in the education department and stuff like that. And then you have to, how can I say? You can absolutely do in the classroom something with students regardless of this environment. This environment is not what the relationship with your students, basically.
So I think what I hear you saying is that that there are certain structures in schools and certain cultures in schools, and sometimes it's challenging for us because it may be not our culture or not our way of wanting to do things or our expectation on how things we think should be run. And what you have found is that regardless of that, you can still show up in the way that you want to for the students in the classroom.
Yes, exactly. What I was seeing in this specific school was that it seemed to me that some of what was going on was actually detrimental to the relationships between students and teachers. And that's why there were so many issues in terms of behavior management, because it's quite a strict school in terms of behavior management. I mean, it goes to very little details that, to me, I thought, why do we need that? Some teachers think it's necessary because that helps promote high expectations and this kind of thing. So, but at the same time, I think for some children or for some teenagers, because most of them were teenagers, it's really, it backfires a lot harder. This kind of thing, like, I don't know, like uniform, stuff like that. You tell them, okay, your trousers are 1 inch too short or whatever, things like that. That, to me, don't seem to be. Some kids are like, okay, it's like this, it's like this. But for others, that's an opportunity to tell you a lot more about what their issues are than this little thing. And so it goes, it can go a very long way. And what I found, actually, I followed one of the assistants for a day. And I remember one of the kids, he was excluded for a good period of the year, actually. But they kept him in school, but he was internally excluded. And what I saw when I talked to him, I spent my break with him, and yeah, just because I wasn't a teacher, I wasn't going to tell him. I mean, I was a teacher, but not his teacher. So I wasn't going to tell him anything. So we had a normal discussion, and it was, and then the assistant said, "Oh, that's great. That it's really good to have you because it diffuses all this kind of thing, all the pressure that can be there." And I think as teachers, you can do that in your classroom all the time, actually. You don't have to embody the pressure, the tension, everything that is around. You can be the calm in the chaos. You can be that in your classroom, that when they enter in, they know it's home.
Yeah, that's really nice. So like the tension stops at the door, and when they come into the classroom, it's a different atmosphere. And as the teacher, you can create that atmosphere, even if there's a very stressful or tense type of system outside of that classroom walls. I think that's a really positive way to look at it, because I've been doing my graduate certificate in Islamic education, and so in our live sessions we've all been sharing some of the tests and challenges that we experience in schools, and especially those of us who have a more of a connecting with students and understanding behaviour kind of approach, as opposed to consequences are the solution and rewards are the solution type approach, find it very hard sometimes in that sort of school environment where the whole behaviour management policy is around consequences and escalations and all that sort of thing. And at no point in that process is there a check-in with the student and go, are you okay? Because, we understand, as we understand with the Inside Out paradigm, behaviour is actually a symptom, not the problem.
Exactly.
And so we've had a lot of discussions like that in my course. And I love what you're saying is that makes it really hopeful to teachers who have this attitude, but are in a school where there's all this escalation, that perhaps if they create that environment in their classroom, where it is the soft place for the kids to fall, that they are able to come in there, that there is this love and respect and compassion in that room, potentially those kids will behave better, because as we know, with all that connection, kids tend to want to do well and they want to behave well. It's just when things get upsetting in their life, they go off the rails. Those kids are likely to behave better, and so they won't actually have to experience that system. They won't have to experience the tension that's outside that classroom walls, inshallah. I mean, some might at some point, but again, they still have that environment to come back to in the classroom. I really love the way you put that. It just brings hope, instead of people feeling like, oh, I have to change the whole system, or I have to change schools and go to a different school or whatever. You can do it in your own room.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, even there's the fear as teachers as well that in this school, for example, there's a policy of open door observation. So any teachers, any senior leader can come into your class to check that you're applying things the way they want. Mm-hmm. So it can be very overwhelming this way. But what I have seen is that the senior leadership, who are really the senior leadership, like the head teacher, or, generally, even if you're not applying the system to the letter, but your class is engaged, is, doing some work, is enjoying their lessons, and they can see these positive relationships, that's it. They are not going to tell you, okay, you need to do this or that, because their objective at the end of the day, if they've put these structures in place, is because they think that was the best thing for everyone, mm-hmm. Not because they want to be cruel. It's because they think it's going to bring those kids, to where they need to be. Yeah. And so if you have a different approach and they see it works, I haven't experienced the head teacher say, okay, no, you can't do that. I mean, they will fuss over things like, okay, you haven't taken the register, stuff like that. Of course, you know, things that are, but about the relationship you have, the way you teach, if it works, that's it. There's not, you don't have to justify yourself necessarily. And I think there's a lot of fears among teachers working this kind of thing about doing things differently for this reason, because they may be told by maybe, you know, middle managers have a lot of pressures as well, and they are, you know, they have accountability. They have to tell senior leaders how things are working, and it's hard for them as well. So maybe they'll tell you, okay, no, you need to do this way, but they're not in your class every single day, basically, or every single minute of your lesson. So the relationship is built over time with your students. Yeah.
So I think the tricky thing is that, you know, there's pressure. Well, I know here in Australia there's pressure because we have this particular website called the My Schools website that basically declares to the world the status of the school. And so there's a lot of pressure on the school to perform well in certain tests so that they look good on that website. So that pressure means that leadership feel pressure to make sure that, you know, the school's performing. And then that leadership puts that pressure down onto the middle leadership, that puts the pressure down onto the teachers. And then the teachers can put the pressure onto the students. And then you're setting up the environment to be like a pressure cooker, where the kids at the bottom are just going to go boom because it's just like too much pressure on them. And what you're suggesting is that the teacher be that buffer to leave that pressure at the door, because they know that if they do things the way they know will work, that the end result will be that the good results will come then back up. And then what you were saying is that there's a lot of fear around taking that leap and doing your own thing and taking charge of your classroom the way you would like to run it under that pressure, under that environment. And so I guess that's where our understanding of the inside out paradigm comes into it as well, is understanding that that fear is our thought in the moment, that a lot of those fears come from assumptions that we make, that what people will think of what we're doing or what people will say of what we're doing. So it's coming from a lot of assumptions and not really knowing, like maybe some people will think things and some people will say things. But as you said, at the end of the day, if you're producing the results, they're not going to want you to change what you're doing. And so, yeah, this is, you know, subhanAllah, where what we're learning could be really helpful for teachers to really have the classroom that they want to have, is understanding their own feelings and their own thinking and how that might be a barrier, that in fact their school doesn't need to change, that the school policy doesn't need to change, or maybe it does, but in order for them to have the classroom environment they want, maybe it doesn't.
Exactly, yes.
And that's amazing, isn't it? That is very freeing, because as teachers, I think we all go into teaching because we want to make a difference, because we want students to learn, we want to be able to teach. We don't want to be stuck in behaviour management. I know that was one of the reasons why I backed away from working in a classroom, was because I thought, hang on a minute, you spend your whole time doing behaviour management, you never teach anything. And so being able to facilitate that the way you want to will bring that joy back into teaching, right? You know, not having to be focused on the behaviour management and more on the teaching and more on creating the learning experience that you want to put into effect. I love that idea. In fact, it fits very well. We've just studied some works that talk about our scholars of the past, you know, from even, you know, 1,600, 800 years ago, and the sort of classroom environment and teaching environment that they taught in, or how they explained the teacher-student relationship. And what we're talking about right now fits very much with what they taught back then. You know, I think we've lost along the way some of what our predecessors were teaching us in this way. You know?
Oh, yes. Yes, I agree. Yeah.
So do you have any specific examples or stories that you would like to share with the audience of what you've witnessed or experienced yourself that would help? It's putting you on the spot, isn't it?
Because I think, so to give you another example of a different experience, because I was in a different school in the second placement where behavior management was not working at all. And so it's interesting as well that because some teachers will be like, well, if it's chaos in the class, the only thing you can do is being, you know, consistent with behavior, and you just have to give points properly and or whatever, you know, rewards and consequences in whatever shape or form that takes in the school. And yes, no, I don't know. Although I haven't come to the bottom of it, because I think, I'm not sure. I wasn't, again, when you're not, when you're just a student teacher in a school, there's only so much impact you can have, but you know, you can still have that impact on building these relationships. But obviously it takes more time because there is a lot of, but in that specific school, there were issues between the community around the school, so parents and the teachers. And that's where you think, okay, well, actually there's a lot that teachers could do. But I think you also need to be a community there in terms of understanding your responsibility in there. And I was hearing a bit more in that school that, okay, but parents, but kids, you know, it's because of them that things are not working, not because of us. So there was not as much, I say. I mean, I won't say no, this is not true. A lot of teachers would take responsibility for what they were doing, but you could hear that more when people got frustrated. It was like, okay, well, obviously it's because the parents are saying this and the kids are doing that and blah, 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 you know, all this kind of.
So what's happening is they're not seeing that their feelings are coming from thought, that they're experiencing this through their own perception of the situation. And so they're trying to put the blame elsewhere, and something else outside has to change or be fixed in order, you know, for things to be better. And I think we see a lot of that, unfortunately. I visited a school. I won't say where because I don't really want to, but it wasn't I went overseas and I visited another school, and I did some work with the parents and the teachers explaining, then it was about peaceful parenting and peaceful teaching. And on the ride on the train back afterwards, one of the teachers happened to be catching the same train with me. We had a bit of a chat. And there was kind of like this us and them thing going on between parents and teachers at the school. And I think we get, unfortunately, a bit of that going on. I know we've had our fair share of those dramas here too with some of our schools. And what you have is, instead of people being able to see that, hang on a minute, you know, firstly, it's not a good idea to speak or act when I'm having feelings, because then I'm going to make the situation worse. And in fact, teachers and parents both speaking and acting while they're feeling angry, frustrated, whatever they're feeling in the moment. So that's one of the things that we teach, which makes it very helpful to coming to solutions in these situations, is not speaking or acting in those moments. But secondly, seeing that the other side had to change in order for it to work. So the teachers seeing that the parents had to be different in order for it to work. So parents had to either, I don't know, chase up the homework or have stricter bedtimes or whatever it was that was causing the problems in the classroom. And vice versa, the parents having this issue that, well, the teachers should have taught the kids better at this or that or whatever, and the expectations on each other's and the assumptions on each other. And so with the understanding of the inside out paradigm, understanding how a human experience works and that our feelings are actually coming from thought in the moment, it helps us actually see that, hang on a minute, it's not about them. It's not about the kids. It's about me, how I'm feeling. And once those feelings settle, then I can actually look at the situation and go, okay, what do we really need to do? I think that's what we're missing, isn't it? This opportunity for people to come together in that space where there's calm, there's wisdom, and there's respect for one another to come up with solutions for kids. And then we wonder why the kids aren't behaving well when the parents, when the community, like the school community, parents and teachers are conflicting. You know, the kids are going to get one thing when they're at school. They're going to be told, make sure your parents do this and make sure your parents do that. And when they get home, the parents are going to say, how dare the teachers tell us to do that? And the kids get to be the meat in the sandwich. It's like almost being like kids in divorce, like between mum and dad, right? But just between their teacher and their parent, right?
Yes.
And then we end up with kids misbehaving. And so then we bring in these super strict behavior policies to keep them in line. And it's like, I think we're missing the point somewhere here.
Absolutely. And I've experienced that myself because, and I realized, so when my son was, it was the second year of primary, and I was struggling with other things. And so I was like, oh my God, you know, getting up for school every morning and getting this uniform, because it was new to him, and I wasn't. Yeah, it was hard for me to accompany him with that, because when I was a kid, going to school was I loved it at his age, and obviously he doesn't have the same idea about school as me. But so I was talking about school like this, like not trusting the school, and actually that's when he started to not want to go at all, and be even more resistant. And then we had some issues with the teacher, and some issues were, you know, justified, but it could have been done very calmly now that I look at it, and with the understanding of the inside out paradigm a bit more, and just, you know, setting the limits where they need to be set very calmly, having a meeting with the teacher, saying, you know, and yeah, there are other, like Daniela and Halima who talk more about this kind of thing, maybe Daniela especially, about advocating for your children and stuff like that. So so yes, you can do it in a very, you know, there doesn't need to be all of this overpouring of your emotions on your children that damages everything, and then you have to repair it somehow after. It takes time, and and even for them, I don't. That's why another thing as well is the assumption about ability of children. Like we think, oh well, and that's what's happening in schools as well, because a lot of schools are streamed into levels. At least in the UK, you have, the lower set, that's what they're called informally. Now we've got formal vocabulary, but in the staff room, that's what teachers still call them. So that's important to know that, and what does it mean for children, this? How does it affect your relationship with them? Should we still, talk, even if you have this, because it might be easier to manage, I don't know. Do you need to refer to that this way? Do you need to think about this way? That's more.
Like labels can cause quite a lot of damage like that. Like I remember when I did my prac teaching that it was very challenging, for instance, in maths, to be catering for those that finished really quickly because they got it, and still supporting those who were really struggling. And then you've got the ones in the middle, and that's fine. They're great. So you kind of set up a lesson, you get everybody kick-started on it. The ones that are just in the middle, they fill up the lesson doing the work. You bring all the ones that are struggling into the middle, and you're trying to work with them and go through it again with them in a different way. And all the Speedy Gonzales come to you, what can I do now? I'm finished, interrupting you, trying to work with the ones that are at the lower level. And so it is hard. I can see how hard it is dealing with a classroom where you have different levels. But on the other hand, if you split the children out into levels, there's a stigma around what level you're in. And so I get it. There's a logistical challenge there of not splitting, and it logistically makes it so much easier to split. But what are we doing psychologically when we do that? So there's a lot of things that we're faced with like that. And I think that as teachers, we can be very mindful of the language that we use, like you were saying about how it's labelled. But even with the kids, because the kids start labelling themselves, oh, I'm in the dumb maths class, I must be bad at maths. And I get that with my two younger kids. You know, they're actually got strengths in very different areas. So where one is strong, the other one isn't. And so there gets to be a bit of a competition or a put down going on and all that sort of thing. And so I try very hard to kind of rephrase these things and go, well, actually, no, you're strong in this. Maybe you're not strong in this. That doesn't mean you're dumb. Just means that you're not strong in this. Or it doesn't even necessarily mean you're not strong in this. It means that at the moment you're finding it challenging. And that's okay too, because we all find certain things challenging.
Yes.
And just changing that language changes the whole experience of it. Because as we're saying, you know, the way we feel and experience things is through the way we think about things. And for children, the adults in their life are very influential in how children think about life and about themselves.
Exactly. And I think sometimes it can be really subtle in the way, you know, the way we don't believe in a child's ability, for example. And also sometimes we get stuck in there. We get stuck. We're like, okay, no, that's never going to work. And sometimes, I don't know if we can get unstuck by understanding, for instance, the inside out paradigm, that's great. But if we're not able because we're just not there, it can be also somebody else who maybe has another understanding. Because I see when it comes to teachers, I was when I was an assistant, I was helping a kid who was, I don't know, the teacher thought there was no way he could do anything with him. And he was a teacher who was really good and generally had very high expectations. But with this kid, I don't know what happened before. I don't know the history behind it. But so he said, okay, just take care of him then, because that's it for me. I cannot, you know. And I was like, okay. And it was a question of, connecting. Yeah. Because that's exactly what we did. For some time, I took him apart and I was listening. It was history. And I think, you know, history is taught in a way that there, obviously, because you have to pass your exam, you pass it because you have to learn certain things. And obviously there is some critical thinking, but within a, you know, framework, it doesn't go too far. And I think he was very interested in history, but not the maybe mainstream history or, you know, things that were maybe a bit out there. And so I listened to him telling me all this kind of thing. I was like, oh, but actually I generally find it interesting. So I didn't have to really pretend I was listening. And we worked on the thing as well, on what he needed to learn. He actually jumped 2 grades for his GCSE, the final exam in secondary. And the teacher came back to me and said, how did you do that? And I didn't feel like I have done nothing at all. I mean, nothing more than what he did in terms academically. It was just this conversation that was like, well, yeah, this is very interesting what you're telling me now, and the power of connections like this, it's amazing.
There's another interesting area to think about in terms of subjects like history. So one of the weeks of our course, we were talking about dropouts versus pushouts. And what that was about was the relevance of curriculum. And so for our Muslim kids who are in maybe non-Muslim schools, history is taught in a way where it's from the white historical perspective, right? And some of these students are from backgrounds of where white people have colonized their country, and colonization, which has harmed their people, is painted in a positive light in history. And so what you find is a disconnect for that student, because that's not their version, that's not their perspective of the history. And so it's not that that student is a bad student, and it's not that they're not engaged in history, it's that that version of history is a disconnect for them. And so it's not that they drop out, it's like that they're pushed out. They're pushed out because of it not being relevant. And I liked the thing that you said about critical thinking, how it's sort of, yes, we're allowed to think critically, but we've got to stay within the boundaries of where we're allowed to think critically. And that's not critical thinking. Critical thinking should be that there's no boundaries, that we should be able to question, especially the topic of history, because history is something that is very much based on the perspective, the angle in which the storyteller is. I mean, I think it's interesting that history can break it down into his story, or it could be her story, because it really is a story, isn't it? It's a story about the past from the perspective of the person who's telling it.
Exactly. I think I got really aware of that when I moved to Ireland, actually, because one of the first topics that I learned at uni was on the French Revolution. And so I was like, really? I've never, where did you get that history from? I've never learned it this way. So it was really interesting like that, having, you have a cool.
Because I guess the French have a different version of the French Revolution to the rest of us who look at it from the outside, right?
Exactly. And you see that, oh, that's how you see us. Oh, and I suppose that's the same for all the kids who don't feel represented by the history they learn at school. So.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. We've been on quite a journey in this conversation to do with all different things. I hope it's opened people's thinking around education and kids and parenting and teaching and classrooms and schools and history. We've covered quite a few things. Is there any last thing that you'd like to share from this whole topic of teaching and inside out paradigm and student schools?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, yeah, we've covered quite a bit. I just say that to follow our hearts when we teach. I think we forget that so much sometimes, because this is as actually a teacher I know says, it's spiritual work first and foremost. This is not academic work first and foremost. So that's where you can make a difference by doing this work spiritually, not only academically. I mean, obviously, yeah, if you're teaching history, then maybe you have a degree in history, but that's not the main thing. The students you have, they'll not necessarily remember history dates, but they might remember, the relationship you have with them, what you've taught them as at a spiritual level. So, an IOP, inside our paradigm, that comes there as well. And what we're talking as well about the critical thinking, being, you know, without boundaries. I don't think Sydney Banks would have found the inside out paradigm, or, you know, explained it, or, you know, all of if he had had this kind of critical thinking boundaries. It takes off the boundaries this way. So yeah, I think that's.
So the only boundaries that really count are the limits that are set by Allah. You know, Allah has given us clear guidelines how to be as human beings. They're the only boundaries. So critical thinking, there's nothing wrong with critical thinking. It's how we behave that is of essence. It's what we're judged for. It's what we say and do that we're going to be accountable for. But if we explore things through thought, it's not that we're not doing anything to harm another person. But I think that unfortunately we live in a world where they want everything to be a particular way, and so they need to put boundaries on how we think about things so that we show up and behave in the way they want us to. As long as our manner is pleasing to Allah, that's what counts.
Exactly. Yes. And those boundaries, we fulfill them out of love, not because, you know, not out of fear. I mean, not out of the kind of fear you have when you go to a school. This kind of fear, that's what I mean. There might be
schools. Yeah, but I get what you're saying. You're saying that we adhere to those limits for the love of Allah, because we want to please Allah, because we don't want to transgress those limits for that reason, but also because we know that Allah has put them there for a reason, so that we are loving to others and that we're not transgressing their limits. Because if we transgress the limits set by Allah, then we're going to transgress other people's limits.
Yes, absolutely.
We're going to be loving towards other people. So that was a good point, Maryline. I think we might wrap it up there. We've had a few people here with us. I think many of them have disappeared. Romy and Daniela and Khadija, Khadur and Melissa have certainly been here with us for the conversation. I'm not sure who's here with us now, but whoever is listening, whoever listens to the recording of this, we'd love to hear your takeaways. Share them with us, what you thought of our discussion, any points you have around what we've discussed today. Go for it. You know, we're here open-minded. As we said, we would be hypocrites if we said critical thinking should be boundless and then we tell you off for whatever your thoughts are. We're here open to hear what other people's perceptions are and what other people's perspectives are. So please share. Romy says, I love the... I'm not quite sure. Love, I think she's made a typo here, something to do with about fearing Allah but not to systems and people. Yeah, so steering towards fearing Allah rather than systems and people. I think that's what she's saying. Yes, pretty sure we agree with that, right? Alhamdulillah. Jazakallah khair, Maryline. I know it's very early there. You probably need to get into starting your morning and getting kids ready for school and all that sort of thing. So Jazakallah khair for spending time with me today and sharing your thoughts about that.
Well, Yaki, it was a pleasure. Yeah.
Okay.
And we still... Assalamu alaikum.